Hi everybody. Hey, if your roof is bad, do you have to replace it in order to sell your house? I'm a roofer, so I don't know the answer to that question, but I know who does. It's my friend Barry Cavanaugh. He's a realtor here in our city, and he's going to help you understand all the intricacies about what happens with the roof, if there's problems with the roof, and how that affects the sale.
Yeah, I'm Barry Cavanaugh. I'm with ERA Shields Real Estate, part of the Cavanaugh Clowder team.
Barry, how long have you been a realtor here in Colorado Springs?
About 22 years. A long time.
So you know what you're talking about. You're the man.
Yeah, I'm the man.
Hey, so the big question is, right? I mean, you've dealt with what, hundreds, thousands of real estate transactions.
Mm-hmm.
At least some of those, there have been issues with the roof.
Yep.
So the main question is, if there's any kind of damage on the roof, hail damage, wind damage, do you have to replace the roof in order to be able to sell the house?
That's a good question, Tracy. Typically when we meet with a client to sell their house, we're going to ask them about the roof. How old is their roof? Have you had any hailstorms? Just questions like that. And typically, if they tell us that their home's roof is like 10 years old or there has been a hailstorm in the last few years, that's when we're going to call a professional roofer in just to let us know. So the roofer tells us that there's a handful of shingles that have hail damage. Replace it, man, the roof's in tough shape, so call your insurance company. But at that point, we go back to the seller, and that kind of determines if we're gonna replace it or not. It just really depends on what we're told.
Do you find instances where the seller just is totally unaware, right? So you might ask them, have you had any hailstorms here? And they're like, I don't know, right? Yep. What happens in a situation like that?
Well, and that's typically it. Sometimes we'll ask somebody, have you had a hailstorm in the last couple, 3 years? I don't think so. Well, we're around the city enough to know where the neighborhoods are that have had hailstorms. And so at that point, typically if they don't really feel that they have an answer for it, again, that's when we're calling somebody to come and check the roof. More than anything, we want that taken care of before we ever put the house on the market, because we don't want that to be an issue, halfway through a contract.
All right, then. So should a realtor or a home seller, a buyer, rely solely on a home inspector's report as opposed to getting other professionals to look at a problem, maybe that a home inspector has found, such as the roof?
It doesn't make a difference if it's a roof or whatever it is when it comes to the home inspection. The home inspector is there to basically guide you to there could be an issue with something. So again, the home inspector is not, in most cases, not a licensed professional on anything that they're checking. They're basically there to provide the information. So if a home inspector tells us that there is the roof shot and it needs to be replaced, well, in most cases, again, we're going to the professional and they're going to look at the roof and then they're going to tell us. And sometimes they come back and say, oh, there's damage up there, but there needs to be some repairs and then it'll be fine. Other times they tell us it needs to be, contact the insurance company and replace the roof. So to answer your question, no, we are not going to completely rely on what the home inspector says. That's just enough information to get us a professional on the roof or any other item.
Like a springboard. Basically.
Exactly, that's exactly right.
Yeah, because, I don't know how many times we've encountered real estate transactions as a roofing contractor where the home inspector said, oh, there's hail damage, told the seller, you should file an insurance claim. Yep. Seller files an insurance claim, adjuster comes out and says, no, there's no hail damage on here, and they deny the claim, which is never a good thing for a homeowner.
Right. And then that goes back to what we were talking about in the beginning. Before we ever put that home on the market, we want to know that so that if a home inspector does come in there and tells us there's a big issue, well, we've already done that. We've already checked it. We already know what the answers are. So we're a little step ahead of the game on that, if that makes sense to you.
All right. So then, Barry, why does it seem like there's nearly always an issue with the roof that shows up on a buyer's inspection report from a home inspector?
Yeah, I would say that that's about 100% true. But I think that, again, it kind of back what we said before about the inspector. They're not a licensed professional in most cases on anything, but they know some about all of it. And so there could just be a pop nail on a roof, and they're going to put that in there. So
yeah, recommend having a licensed professional roofer inspect.
Yep. And so that's basically our way to get there. So again, whenever we list a property, that's one of the things we're always going to have that checked out before, because that's just one thing we don't want to have to worry about. So yeah.
Have you seen the roof affect the value of a house during a sale, either higher or lower?
I would say that I don't know how much like value it adds or decreases maybe so much. Like probably a perfect example is, let's just say a home has a brand new roof installed on it. And maybe it's high impact resistant shingle. So that just so in most cases, a person's insurance is going to be a little bit less. So somebody might pay a little bit more for that house, just knowing they don't have to worry about the roof and that their insurance might be a little bit lower. So you might see a situation where maybe it's a deal where there's more than one person competing for that house. So if people know that and are aware of that, which we would definitely let them know that, we might get somebody to bid a little bit higher on that house than they would have otherwise. So it could increase it a little. Now, how about decrease it? I'd say probably the one way it could decrease the home is, let's just say a house has T-lock shingles. They're not going to be able to get that insured in most cases, and somebody maybe just doesn't have the money to do it. So they're just saying we're selling it as is. Well, in probably a lot of cases, it's going to be an investor or somebody that's going to buy it. Well, they're going to get it for a little bit lower price because they're the ones that are taking on that risk of that roof. So I'd say that's probably the only way that would probably really lower the value. Again, if a home has a 25-year-old roof and it's not defective, insurance company will still cover it.
Yeah.
You know, that might get a little bit less because they know it's going to have to get, and they're got to be relying on a hailstorm, and it may or may not come.
Okay, so scenario, roofer is talking to a homeowner is thinking about selling the house. Maybe the homeowner's like, yeah, maybe we'll live here for another year, maybe 2 more years. Roofer is trying to convince the homeowner to do like a $15,000 or a $20,000 upgrade to the roof. So roof costs this, roofer's trying to upgrade him to like a luxury product or something like that. Is that homeowner going to get his money back?
I would say no.
Yeah.
No, I don't think that I would, if a client asked me that, I would just tell them I don't think you're going to get the money's worth. If you're going to be putting a new roof on there, just put the standard roof on, maybe the high impact shingle roof, but I definitely wouldn't go more than that because they're not going to get that return.
But beware, right, of the seller who is going to put on like the cheapest crummy quality shingle out there.
Right.
Oh, well, so that's a good point, right? If you're representing a buyer, house is going to be sold, the roof has to be done as part of the transaction. In your opinion, which party should get to determine what material gets put on the house?
Unfortunately, it's probably the seller, just because the seller's the one paying for it. Now, if we were in the market that we've been in for the last couple of years, the seller really has all control. Market's changing a little bit now, so the buyer might have a little bit more control than they did before. If we go back, we can always go back. If we're representing the buyer, we can always go back to the other side and say, you know what, we don't want this product put on the roof. Well, it's going to cost us this much more to put the next one up. Okay, well, then the buyer might say, I will pay that extra $1,500, $2,000, whatever that is to get that on. But typically the seller, if the seller's the one paying for it, unfortunately, we're going to require that it's a local licensed roofer. We don't want somebody from who knows where to put this roof on and use the worst product and not get a permit and all that stuff. But so we can request that. We can put that right in there saying that we need to have that.
I think you brought up a really good point. Even if the seller is going to be the one that decides who the roofer is and what the material is, I think it's a benefit to the buyer to actually offer to pay for a better quality material to be put on there. It doesn't even need to be an impact resistant shingle. Right. When we've had buyers do that when we're working in a real estate transaction, we're communicating to the buyer saying, well, this is the product that they're planning to put on there. You may want to consider upgrading to something better. But it doesn't even need to be the IR shingle. Maybe we just know that it's a a junk shingle that they're planning to put on there just because it's super cheap. They're trying to get out of it as cheaply as they can. You don't even need to take that big step up to an IR shingle. Just take a little baby step up to a better quality shingle that's not just a builder grade shingle. Maybe that costs you $200, $300, $400, $500 is definitely worth it.
Yeah, and I think that we have seen, in past years, I wouldn't have thought a lot about it in regards to going up that next shingle. But here in the last year, we've heard more and more of defective shingles, and with one particular company. And so we probably will look at that a lot more now. We would probably advise our buyers, if we know there's a new roof being put on, to talk to the other side and say, what brand are you using? If they're using that particular brand, we might say, yeah, we need to move, pay that extra, like you said, a few $100s to get you to that next shingle.
Yeah, yeah, and oftentimes it's not even, there's really not even a price difference. That's the curious thing about it, right, is that shingle that you're talking about, which we're trying to discern whether we should name it or not. The price difference really is not that great, right? So it's definitely worth it for a future home buyer to say, okay, let's talk to one or two or three other roofers, or talk to our realtor, and maybe he connects us to a roofer who can tell us what we should be putting on there, whether it's an upgraded product or not.
Yeah, and I would agree with that completely. So,
what about the different roof types? Do you ever get asked by buyers or sellers, especially buyers, right, who may be asking you whether should they be looking at a house with metal, should they be looking at a house with tile? Do they care about that kind of stuff, and do they ask you about it?
We don't get that question a lot. I'd say we get it mostly from clients who are coming from out of state, maybe where they lived. Maybe all of them were, concrete shingles or metal roof or whatever. So that's about the only time we really get asked that question. People don't really worry too much about roofs. They hear it more from us or that inspector or whatever. Most people, they don't even care what kind of roof's on there. They're more worried about what the house is. So again, that's kind of our job, is to make sure that we're bringing that to their attention, so that, again, they're not worried about something 6 months down the road that we didn't take care of when they bought the house.
What could potentially be the biggest repair cost for somebody who buys a house? Okay, somebody buys a house. What is it about a house that could cause the biggest repair cost?
Foundations are usually pretty obvious. If there's a foundation issue, we know about that. Sewer is probably one of the next ones that, but again, we're checking those now all the time too, just to make sure that, and again, a roof,
where does a roof fall in
I would
the
say
list
that,
of costs?
The good thing about a roof, if there's hail damage, the insurance company, you have a deductible. If there's a sewer issue, you're paying $10,000, $15,000. There's no insurance for that. So the roof could definitely be a big expense if it's just a situation of they've lived there for 25 years, never had a hailstorm, never had anything, and now they have to replace that roof. Of course, that's a huge expense at that time. But at least living in Colorado, we kind of have the hail advantage to us, is that a lot of times you'll get a hailstorm before the roof gets too old. But yeah, it's definitely a big expense, but you do have insurance for that expense. So
yeah, in a lot of cases, yeah.
In a lot of cases,
good point.
Correct. Yep.
Okay, so tell me how you and your team have benefited from having a relationship with a roofer.
Right.
Because a lot of realtors don't have that.
Right. If we meet with somebody about a roof or about listing their house, and there is a possibility of any kind of roof issues, we just know that we can call you, that you're going to be able to come out, you're going to be able to tell us what needs to be done. And again, maybe it's not taken care of right when we put the home on the market, but we let anybody that's looking to buy the house that there is some issues that have to be taken care of with the roof, and they will be taken care of before closing. The less things we have to worry about when a house goes under contract, the better. And as we said, the roof comes up a lot. And so if we can already have that taken care of before we ever put it on the market, it's just going to be a much smoother transaction for the seller and the buyer than it would have been if we wouldn't even have talked about it before we put the home on the market. So again, it's just a matter of letting everybody know what's going on.
Do you have any memorable stories about a transaction a real estate transaction that is memorable because of the roof?
A perfect example, we were kind of talking about this earlier, about a defective shingle. We had a house that we had under contract recently. We were representing the buyers, and it came back that there was some granule loss on it from the inspector, and so we had the roofer come out. Well, come to find out, it wasn't from hail or anything, it was defective shingles. Well, after checking, they knew that they could probably get the shingles replaced because they're under warranty by that company, but it might take 30 days, it might take 6 months, we didn't know. And then on top of that, they only would warranty the shingles, not the labor to put them on. So
yeah, well, let me interject there, because that company, yeah, they'll pay for the shingles, to replace the shingles, but they don't pay for any of the other accessory products that also have to be replaced. So the underlayment, the flashings, even the ridge shingles and the starter shingles, they're not paying for that.
Yeah.
And like you said, they're not paying for the labor, and they're also not paying to dispose of the shingles.
Yeah.
That's all on the homeowner.
yeah, so I mean, so think about that, how many thousands of dollars that is, and then all of a sudden, does the seller have the money to do that right then? Can they do it? So we were pretty concerned that we weren't going to get this transaction done because, again, how long would it take? Would the seller be willing to put the money aside for that? What was going to be the situation? Well, again, we're pretty much ready for this transaction to probably terminate and move on to the next house, and then all of a sudden the seller came back and said, you know what, we're just going to replace this roof. But what a bummer for the seller. I mean, to think that, they put a brand new roof on a few years ago, and here's a defective shingle, and now all that money's coming out of their pocket for something that they didn't even think about. So that's probably recently that's probably one of the most memorable roof things we've had.
Well, and the sad thing about that is that it's not a one-off kind of thing with that company, with that shingle manufacturer.
Yeah.
It's not like, oh yeah, we've got a problem here and there. It's consistent. I mean, there's whole housing developments here in our city that use that shingle, and the vast majority of them are bad.
Yeah.
So it's not just like a one-off.
Yeah, and that's not the only time I've heard about this in the last 6 months. We've had some other issues with it too, and really both of them were the same thing. The seller ended up paying to have a new roof put on in both cases, and neither one of those did they have an opportunity to get any kind of reimbursement for.
Paying out of pocket.
Out of pocket, yep.
Yeah.
But it's cheap to put a roof on. I mean, it's only a couple $1,000s.
Right, right, in your time machine.
Yeah, in your time machine, that's exactly right. So.
All right, so I'm going to put you on the spot. If you've got any golden nuggets, one little bit of wisdom that you would want to share for people that buying a house or even selling a house related to the roof.
Oh, I would always get it checked. I mean, you don't, if you have, and there's even a situation where, people will look at permits to see when a roof got put on. And so as a buyer or a buyer's agent, you look and you see the roof is 2 years old. And there hasn't been any hailstorms in the last 2 years. So, you know what, we don't even have to worry about it. Well, again, we've had years where big hailstorms and you have all these roofers come from everywhere, and they aren't maybe putting them on per code of El Paso County. And so even if a roof is 2 years old, again, this is kind of where the inspector comes in. The inspectors drive you nuts at times, but if they can see that something maybe wasn't done quite right, then that gets the roofer out there. And again, maybe that roof is only 2 years old, but they did something wrong, and they didn't do it right, and it gives them an opportunity to correct it. Because again, you don't want to be the one that you think, oh, it's 2 years old, it's all great, and 5 years down the road, you still own the home, and all of a sudden you got a leak or something because something was done wrong that we could have had taken care of before we ever bought the house or sold the house or whatever the situation is. So,
hey, you watched the whole video. Thanks so much for that. I think that you're going to like this video right here, so give this one a click. Hey, and Barry, thanks so much for coming out and doing this with us. Really appreciate it. Until our next video, I'm Tracy Bookman, owner of Homestead Roofing.